Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lazaga, here with Dubside.
And you're listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.
So, Dubside, how's your summer turning out?
Oh, not bad. I just found that they had the Greenland competition. Unfortunately, I didn't go, but
Hmm.
it was in Ilulissat about the second week of July, and they I was able to see some of it. K&R TV had posted some of it online, which surprised me because that meant that they went to Ilulissat. They're based in Nuuk. If it's in Nuuk, it's easy for them to do, but they must have made the decision to go to Ilulissat. And yeah, there's extensive coverage. They had I watched all the rope day. They had like six different segments, each like an hour and a half, or 2 hours. So it was like 8 or 9 hours of rope stuff. I watched it all, man.
Wow.
I'm totally into that stuff. And I was just noticing the people. Yeah, I mean, there are people that I recall like little kids. Now they're competing in the adult 20 to 34-year-old age group because it has been 15 years or
Wow.
so.
Cool.
Yeah, but I first went in 2004. So
Yeah.
it's almost 20 years. And there's certain people that I would have expected to be there that weren't there participating, which was sad to see them not there. And there's other people that I've seen it for a long time. And there's some new folks as well. So it was very interesting to watch that.
Yeah, that must be really cool to see these people that you know
Yeah.
competing. What's the station again? I'll have to look that up.
KNR Greenland.
Okay.
And then I think they've got a bunch of their stuff on YouTube. And then I'm not,
Okay. I'll check it out.
yeah.
Yeah.
The titles are in Greenlandic, but I'm familiar with those. So it'll say, Iligi Kashuni Kingosakapanak, which is the team rolling. But if you don't know that, you can look at the picture and you see people on the water. It's probably a race. So they have the harpoons are in the racing. And the rope ones are easy to see because you can see it's indoors on ropes.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
picture on the clip. So yeah. They got two guys who are doing like the commentary, like the voices. Once in a while they show a picture of them, and those are guys. There's Karl Beck, who goes way back, who was once president of Kanak Katufia, and there's Jens Erik Amundsen, who used to be much more involved in running and things, but now he does commentary for KNR. But it's interesting. I wouldn't expect too many Americans to want to sit through the 10 hours per day of it, but
Yeah. Well, speaking of kids, just the other day, I got to do a presentation for 12 to 14-year-olds for this paddle camp week that was set down in Olympia.
okay.
They invited me to talk about skin on frame kayaks and traditional kayaking as part of this week. And the week covered all different kinds of human powered boats, including sea kayaks, Salish canoes, Hawaiian outrigger canoes, dragon boats, and sculling.
All right.
So I went down there. I brought a couple of my skin on frame boats. I brought my Greenland style boat that I've had for like 17 years and reskinned 3 times, and largest skin on frame that was given to Katya by Fox X, who had built it to take on an expedition on northern Vancouver Island.
All right. Wow.
Yeah. So, do you know that story?
No.
Oh, okay. He wanted to do this expedition primitively. Everything that he took on it was something that he built or something that his community had helped him make or he had traded for. So he had
Right.
like a wool blanket that somebody made for him, obsidian knife. He wore leather clothes that he made himself, and he didn't bring any food. So he just foraged and fished the whole time, eating salal berries and rockfish and mussels and oysters that he gathered on the beach. Probably lost 20 or 30 pounds during the trip,
Hmm.
and it was like 30 days long. But once he was done with that expedition, he was done with the kayak, and he said, "Look, you can have it. I don't want it anymore."
Hmm.
So I brought that one and had this whole spiel kind of planned out. But these kids were incredibly inquisitive, so they were just bombarding me with all these questions.
Mm-hmm.
So you just go from answering one question to the next. I was telling stories about Greenland rolling and I felt like they didn't believe a word I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
After I talked about rolling, I said, "So let's go down to the beach and I'll fire off a few rolls." And
yeah.
they were like, "You mean you're going to roll right now?"
Hmm.
I don't think they would have believed very much about the rolling if they actually hadn't seen it with their own eyes.
Yeah. All right. Wow.
So, do you ever talk to kids that age about sea kayaking?
I've at the Minnesota event, which I'll be going to in a couple weeks. They have Boy Scouts come in on the
Oh,
Saturday
that's
just for the
right.
day. Yeah,
That's the event with
and
the castle.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we set up ropes. So I get them involved on the green the rope stuff, and I talk about yeah, they do their kayaking merit badge.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that we have a big traditional element of their kayaking merit badge, which I guess most Boy Scouts don't get to see. But yeah, so yeah, it's a different audience when you're talking to young folks.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I tried to be
Yeah.
entertaining. So I did a few rolls. I didn't want to spend. I only had like an hour, so I
Okay.
didn't have a lot of time to go through a whole bunch of rolls. But I didn't really want
Mm.
to anyway because the
Yeah.
water was looking really kind of soupy. Just
Okay.
cloudy, lots of a few patches of algae. It was right there on the Olympia waterfront next to the marina, which is not a great
Okay.
place to roll.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know what people who are living on board their boats do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then as I left, driving out of the marina, I noticed that there was a sewage treatment plant right at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
inlet. And it was like, oh great,
Yeah.
that was stupid not to see that. Although I
Yeah.
looked on the map, it doesn't say sewage treatment plant on the map. It says the LOTT Clean Water Alliance. The treatment plant takes all the sewage from the city of Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, and all of Thurston
Yeah.
County. That's the name LOTT. Then it dumps it right there in Bud Inlet, right
Mm-hmm.
after treating it.
Well, if it was really bad, you'd be able to smell it even before you started rolling. And if it wasn't too
Yeah,
bad, you'd
yeah.
smell it after you did a roll. You would notice. But yeah, I know from experience.
Well, I figured, I was going to go home and rinse my nose and
Yeah.
gargle with some
Yeah, that's what you
dilute
want to do.
iodine
Yeah.
solution anyway.
Yeah.
So some of these plants, like there's one up in Seattle, which is always accidentally dumping raw sewage into
Mm-hmm.
West Point there. So you never know, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be at the Michigan training camp.
Yes. They've asked me to do a presentation, or I offered to do a presentation. They said they could do that. So I wrote an article for the Mossig newsletter. Did we talk about that last time?
Yes. Remind me.
It was a collection of some of my recollections for the past 20 years of
Oh,
kayaking
yes.
and all
Yes.
interesting things I've done. But the original version, the original draft was twice as long as what eventually got printed because the editor said, yeah, that's just too long to put all, you got to chop it down. So now I get to, I said, I'll give a verbal presentation of the full story of all the stuff that didn't make it into the article.
Oh, okay.
So
Cool.
I got other characters that come in there, other bits and other details of the story that weren't in the print. So that's what I'll do at the Michigan training camp, and I also may do that at the Minnesota gathering, Minnesota in early September.
Awesome. Okay. Well, should we get on with episode 45?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 45. The theme here is how to get started kayaking. But as far as the basic ABCs, I think there are plenty of YouTube videos and other things that cover that. So this is going to be more of a set of somewhat related recollections that all relate to getting started taking up paddling. So I hope you'll find them enlightening in some regard, or at least entertaining. And for music, I have a relatively new group called Tiu and a song called Naluat. Well, the mindset that I use for kayaking, as I've said before, is the water is your friend. If you love your friend, respect your friend, understand your friend, and protect your friend the water will never harm you. So let's bring in the sound of our friend to give us a little ambience. There we are. Back in the early 2000s, I was still in Philadelphia, paddling with my Feathercraft folding kayak on public transportation to get to the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River, which feeds into it. And I used to go through a park near where I lived in West Philadelphia called Clark Park. And in the warmer months, they had a farmer's market there on Thursdays, starting about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, going until maybe 6 or 7. And I took to buying food there. They had a place, one of the stands was selling apples. And this was a kind of farmer's market, it was a real farmer's market where you had to actually be growing the food. You had to be the actual farmer, not just somebody who got it at some food distribution center somewhere and brought it there to make a profit. But actually the grower was there selling his wares. And there was this couple that they were apple farmers. And I took to buying his apples. They were fairly nice apples. He had it lined up with little samples, cut slices you could test. And they were lined up in order from very tart to very sweet. So they had the Golden Delicious and the Wine Sap and Granny Smith and Jonah Gold, all different categories. So you could sort of dial in your preferred taste. And they tasted very good, but sometimes they tasted extremely good. And that was when he would tell you that they had been picked that morning. And you could taste it. These are some good apples. And so sometimes I would come back from kayaking on the way home and buy some apples with my kayak dragging my oversized backpack on wheels behind me. And I may have only a couple times come by with my kayak, but I explained to him, like the farmer guy was selling the apples, that this is a kayak, and I was taking it out on through the trolleys and subways, buses to get out to the river and paddling, and I did this quite often. Well, sometime around 2003, which was about a year before I moved out of Philadelphia, I recall going past there once to buy some apples. And I only see this guy in the summer months. He wouldn't be out there in the wintertime, but went there to get some apples. And the guy looked at me and he said, "You have changed my life." And I said, "Wow, what happened there?" And he said, "I went and bought a kayak." And I was honored that he would be inspired just from talking to me to go buy a kayak. At some point after that, I moved out to the West Coast. And I don't know if I ever got to follow up on that guy as to what he was doing with his kayak, but I'm going to assume that he got a relatively inexpensive kayak at one of the big box stores, like what we call a rec boat, for a couple $100. And I'm also going to assume that most of his kayaking was probably floating in a fish pond, not that far from shore or not in water that was very deep. And if that's how you kayak and you enjoy that, there is nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Just hearing someone else describe how much they enjoy kayaking the way this farmer did and the way maybe you have in listening to this podcast, we'll call that a good enough reason to take up kayaking. Yes, indeed. And there are other reasons. One of my regular stops, an event that I go to in Norway every year as an instructor. There's a lot of regulars come back and there's new people every year. So they usually put me out with the advanced folks for rolling instruction. But I like to get over to the beginners later in the day just so I get a chance to work with as many people as possible. So I come over to the shallow end of the bay there, and there's several people in kayaks. Now, so there's a younger guy there, a kid, he's I don't know, maybe 20-something. And so I start working with him, and I say, okay, let's see what do you got here so far? And he's sort of got a roll working, but needs some tuning up. So I say, okay, well, you got to lift your knee more. Give me more of that knee action. And he says, I can't. And it suddenly occurred to me that that earlier that morning, the day before, when we had everybody on land coming there in introductions, he was the guy in the wheelchair. And so standing next to him, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot." So we worked with he had to use more of his abdominals and his arms, and had a little bit of hip thing going on. But we worked with what he had, and he was able to get the roll to work out. So it's very liberating when you take somebody with a disability and get them all set up in a kayak, and their disability disappears. So that's a reason to take up kayaking. Whenever I'm near a marina, I enjoy looking at all the various yachts, motorboats, sailboats, and comparing the different sizes and shapes. You got the single cabin with the windshield thing, and you got the ones with the second bridge on top of that, and even taller ones with a third bridge on top of that. And you got the sailing yachts and all the different sizes they come in. Now, I can only imagine what it costs to maintain one of these things, with the docking fees and like a large yacht. If you need to fix something on the bottom of it, it doesn't even come out in a trailer. You have to go lift that with a crane or put it in a dry dock somewhere, or it gets very expensive. Well, as nice as any of those boats I see in a marina may appear, I wouldn't trade any of them for my watercraft. I can dry dock mine with one hand. Okay, moving on from reasons to take up kayaking, we'll look at different approaches to taking care of a kayak. Well, back in the early 2000s, I'm in Philadelphia, and I had two friends in New Jersey who were paddlers. It was Chris Rabb, who I've mentioned before, and another guy named Paul Dice. And the guy we took instruction from, Ray Killen, was a big proponent of the Nigel Dennis Romany kayak. So at some point after that, Chris Rabb buys a used Romany kayak, and then Paul Dice decides to buy one brand new. It orders it through the factory and some distributor in this country. And he's got the color all picked out. So it arrives, and these, they're not cheap kayaks, even back then. The fiberglass ones have all sorts of desirable features, like they're lighter than plastic, etc. So we decide to go paddle the Mullica River in New Jersey. Goes through the Pine Barrens, and it's not a whitewater per se. There's moving water, so you float down the stream. It's not really a sea kayak ocean thing, but you can take a sea kayak on this river. It's very, very pretty through the Pine Barrens. So we go out there and we put in, and Paul, this might have been the second time Paul had his brand new Romany in the water, so he's trying to baby it. And we paddle, and it quickly becomes apparent that the water level is far lower than we would like it. And we're coming to all sorts of log jams and obstructions and beaver dams, etc., things we have to carry over. You can't paddle through it. You have to get out of the kayak and lift lift over. Or if it's not too bad, you can sort of push over it and just slide past it. So Chris is in front, and he's just sliding over the obstructions. And I'm in the middle, and Paul is behind us. And Paul, it's a brand new kayak. So he's stopping and getting out and lifting it over every single thing because he doesn't want to get scratches on it. And so I'm trying to keep track of both people, but eventually Chris gets quite far ahead of us, and Paul and I are farther behind. And then it's really slowing him down because, to stop every single time. Where I'm paddling with my feet out of the cockpit so I can jump out quickly when I come to the next obstruction. There's nowhere deep enough to even roll. It's so shallow. So we're out there so long, it starts to get dark. And we don't have our proper lights. We have the little wimpy flashlights that it's hard to paddle and hold at the same time. But we need to get those out because at this point the sun is completely down. And Chris is long gone. We don't know where he is. So it starts raining then, and he's still going very slow, so his kayak doesn't get any scratches on it. And finally we get out, and Chris has been waiting for us at the takeout with his truck and his headlights across the river so he can see us and get us out. And so that was Paul, his second trip with this brand new kayak, and so worried about trying to take care of it. Contrast that with a guy from back in the day that I knew named Brian Scarborough. And Brian would buy a brand new kayak and then turn it upside down on land, take out a screwdriver, and go whoosh, put a nice big scratch on the bottom of it right away. And then he didn't have to worry about getting that first scratch. It was done. He felt that he bought the kayak to use it, and it was going to get scratched anyway, so you might as well get the first one done with. Now, if you don't like scratching up a kayak, you might want to look at a guy I came in contact with years ago, Joe Greenlee, and his company is called Redfish Kayaks. And these are strip-built, or they use a stitch and glue technique. So these are strips of wood 3/4 of an inch wide. So you have many of these strips all laminated together with epoxy. And using light and dark pieces, you can make these intricate patterns that look quite striking. And if I made a kayak like that, and it takes a long time to make these, I wouldn't want to put it in the water at all. I'd just hang it on a wall in a living room and look at it. Well, no matter how you take care of your kayak, it is important to get the correct kayak for you. If you're hoping to get beyond the float in a fish pond level, you need a kayak that does fit your body. And I've often come across people taking rolling instruction who have a kayak that is just too big for them. If you're wallowing around in it, you can't get your knees and thighs in contact with the kayak, you're not going to be able to do very much in terms of rolling, bracing, and maneuvering. And it's hard to tell people sometimes that they got the wrong kayak, but that is what it comes down to. On the other hand, I've seen people who might buy a used skin-on-frame kayak that is really too small for them. They cannot physically fit into it, and they're telling themselves that they will lose some weight that they've been meaning to lose, and then the kayak will fit them just right. And that often is more optimistic than they should be thinking about. Another way people go astray is, it's the line, I got a really good deal on this one. And in looking for a used kayak, you might find a bargain, but if it's not the right size for you, or if it's way more tippy than you're ready to handle, you're not going to be happy in the kayak, and you're going to have to sell it eventually. There was one time at the Traditional Paddlers Gathering, the event in Minnesota, and we were at the campfire, and somebody was taking a little survey. They wanted to know from each person how many kayaks they owned. And we were up to a total of over 100 kayaks pretty easily. I think the average number of kayaks was at more than half a dozen, I think. So in the same way, you wouldn't have one set of clothing for every situation you come into, whether it's a wedding or working or swimming or skiing. Similarly, for all the different kayak situations you might encounter, it's nice to have kayaks that are specialized for each application. Here's one recommendation I have. When you're getting ready to buy a kayak, buy it with the idea that you may very well be selling it again. If you painted your name on it or some special design or did any heavy modifications, it's going to make it that much harder to sell. It's also easier to sell one of the known models of the standard brand manufacturers, Nigel Dennis, Wilderness Systems, or Rebel, Epic, as opposed to those weird orphan brands, you could call them, that nobody's ever heard of and are unknown quantities. After you've done enough kayaking to have refined your tastes and exactly what you're looking for, then you can order the custom model in the exact color you want and do all the modifications you need to, figuring that you're going to hold on to it for a long time. So if you have a kayak, then you need some skills. And to build up some skills, it's best to find a group of paddlers that you can paddle with and learn from. Groups of paddlers come in quite a variety of flavors, and I'll give you some that I've encountered over the years. Well, there is the group I call Speed Freaks. These are folks who are into racing, paddling as fast as they can, and they train for that, and that's their complete orientation. And if you're not interested in that, that is the wrong group to be in. Another group I call the Social Club. These folks are, rather than sit around a coffee table talking, they go out and paddle and talk. So a lot of visiting individually and as a group, and a lot of socializing going on. That's what they do. Perhaps a variation on that is the Drinking Club. These are folks that are all very much into alcohol, and the better ones are, though, they know to do the drinking after they get off the water. And there's some people very enthusiastic about things like single malt scotch. But that's what they do. Then you got the non-paddling group. And this occurs when you have a club with older folks who get older with every year that goes by, as we all do. And eventually, we all will have to give up kayaking because our bodies just won't take it anymore. So you have, it was a social club that was paddling, and then they're still good friends, but most of them aren't interested in paddling anymore. So they'll have their club meetings and various group functions on land, but they just don't get out that much. But it's still a kayaking club. Then you got what I call the skill hounds. These are folks that are very interested in not the skills themselves, but the credentials for the skills. So taking the class, it'll give them the level 2 coach, whatever, or BCU 5-star, 3-star, 2-star. And so they tend to compete with each other for who's got more qualifications than the other one. If one starts taking this class and the other one has to take this class, and they're very, very oriented in that direction. If you're not into that one-upmanship on skills, then that kind of group is better to be avoided. There's a group I would call adrenaline fiends, and these are people looking for heavy excitement. Whitewater tends to do this a lot, but there are sea kayakers who are into the big, big water, and you have to make sure you don't get pulled into stuff that's beyond your skill level if you hang out with these guys. You have the coolness cult. That's where one guy has very advanced skills and is very comfortable being the top dog. And it's a good place to learn from that person. But the top dog is not going to teach people things that would make someone else better than the top dog, because that wouldn't be cool. So the teaching only goes so far. Then you have the long distance club. This is a group of people that will sign up for someone offering, excursion in Florida or Maine or the Apostle Islands or the San Juan Islands or Broken Group in Canada or faraway exotic places, Alaska. It takes a lot of money to be involved in these groups, and it also takes time. When you're just starting out, it can be intimidating to hear people talk about all these exotic places they've gone to. But you don't have to allow them to set your standards. You can decide for yourself what is fulfilling and enjoying for you in your use of a kayak. And then there are paddling situations which could be described as a floating singles bar. Sometimes it's one person in a group, sometimes it's the whole group functioning that way. Kayaking is a nice way to meet interesting people, but if you're not into getting hit on, you can either have your defenses up or find a different group of paddlers. Then you have what I call the authenticity contest. This is where somebody tries to be as much like an actual seal hunter as they can, trying to make it the harpoon and the paddle and the tulik and wanting to make their kayak look like it's real seal skin. You can get as carried away with this as some Civil War reenactors trying to pretend that you're actually reliving the thing. I certainly appreciate people who have studied Greenland culture and techniques as I have, but trying to pretend that we are actual seal hunters doesn't impress me. And finally, you have, actually it's not a group, it's the solo paddler. This is someone who does not want to do the social group thing, and the attraction of paddling is to the solitude and the quiet and alone thing that you get by paddling on your own. And this is how I started paddling, and I still enjoy that quite a bit. You have to be extra concerned about safety if you're going to paddle by yourself. Well, you can find paddlers on, websites, meetup groups, and things like that. But finding the local paddling club is a very good way to hook in with quite a wealth of knowledge, equipment, and resources. Well, most clubs, you could assume, are looking for new members and are welcoming of new members, and they may have some sort of evaluation process. And so I want to tell you about the Philadelphia Canoe Club. And I had started paddling in Philadelphia, but hadn't hooked in with this local club until I'd been going out by myself for a couple of years. And I got involved. See, a kayak club, they'll have meetings, and there's a business part of the meeting, and then there's the presentation part, which is the draw to get people to come to the meeting. And often the business part of the meeting is pretty boring, and there's generally very little controversy and just a lot of boring administrative stuff. And so the Philadelphia Canoe Club, I had offered to be the feature presentation. I was going to show them my folding kayak and talk about all the places I'd gone around Philadelphia. I was going to put the kayak together while I was talking, just to show how it assembled. So I came to this meeting, and at Philadelphia Canoe Club, there was a whitewater contingent and there was a sea kayaking contingent. And at the time, there was some people a bunch of people very involved in dragon boats. These are those big, long, oversized canoe things. You put, 10, 12 people in them, and they all paddle together, and it's a big group exercise thing. And so I think there was a dragon boat group that was renting space at the club to store their big dragon boats. And they may not have been members per se, but I may have these details wrong. But so supposedly the whitewater group had a beef with the dragon boat people for some reason, whatever it came from, I don't know. But so at this meeting, the business meeting starts, and there's an evaluation. There's a new member. We vote on this guy if he's going to be a full-fledged member. We take this vote, and this is the procedural stuff that's pretty perfunctory. So they describe the guy, and they say he's been on the probationary membership for the past 2 months, as our policy is. So now we're going to vote for him. And so I think this guy was maybe more of the sea kayaker type. So somebody in the group of the whitewater people says, I would ask that this be done by secret ballot. And the jaws drop, and people are wondering, what? And they said, no, the bylaws say that if somebody asks for it, then the voting can be done by secret ballot. And so there's some confusion about, is this, and when you hear at these sorts of meetings talking about what the bylaws say, there's bound to be some trouble. So the guy in charge says, okay, so we'll do the secret ballot thing. So they do the secret ballot, and the guy gets voted down, gets rejected, which is like unheard of in this club. And so then people start making all these accusations, and it was they're saying that the whitewater people had it in for the dragon boaters, and this guy had been associating with the dragon boaters, so for that reason they were voting him out. And they're trying to deny that's involved. There's all sorts of personal politics coming into play, and things are getting really, really ugly. And so the guy in charge, the commodore of the club, they call him, the Philadelphia Canoe Club, he's trying to bring the chaos to order, because he says, we got a program we got to get to, and I don't. And so, but people are still really, really upset and screaming out things and stuff. So I made my way up to the front, and I whispered in his ear, and I said, "Excuse me, if you want me to come back another time, because I don't want to take off. If you got some business to finish here, I can see this." And so he says, and then he announced, "I've been informed that we can postpone our program so we can finish this here." So for the next hour, they back and forth and screaming, and it was really ugly. So I think in the end, I heard that the Philadelphia Canoe Club is in a very old historic building right on the Schuylkill River. A beautiful place, this old stone building. They don't rent it. They are allowed by the city to have their club there, and they've been there for I don't know, more than 50 years, I think. And apparently, somebody had researched that they're not allowed to charge rent from that because they don't own the building. So for them to charge the dragon boaters to have their stuff there was improper. So it ended up the dragon boaters had to move somewhere else. And maybe that diffused things somewhat. I don't know. But anyway, I came back a few months later and gave my presentation at a much calmer meeting. So if you go to a local paddlers club meeting, be aware that in general it's typically, almost boring, but you might just hit the one time where you step into the hornet's nest, and if that happens, it's best to just come back another time. If you haven't taken up kayaking yet, what are you waiting for? Okay. Within the last couple years, a group appeared on the Greenlandic music scene, and they are called TIU, T-I-U. Their material is in the singer-songwriter vein. Nice, clean production on this CD. But to give you my own version of it, I've decided to take a minimalist approach and strip it down. So this song is called Naluat.
Naluat kit atsat daguat kit yüzügüşli napimata zajlunak bazevakit agunguyulanema Junwani Jakusinangilat Anok Eakasan nesunga 아삿 한국의 길 좀이 그슬리 나 빗맞아 zaślunak Ilulissat 공우유라는 말 조누한디 다쿠시는 길에 간혹 이까선의 숭아 Naluat atsat daguat isi gışli na pimata zaşlunak basivakit unguyulanemma Junuani dakusinan gilat kanok ikasan yesunga malugakit atsat 한국의 좀이 그슬리 나 빗맞아 zaślunak Ilulissat 공우유라는 말 조누하니 다쿠시는 길에 간혹 이까선의 숭아
All right, is that minimal enough? Well, the group is called TU, and the vocalist's name is Pernilla Kretsman. And I've met a number of people in Denmark and in Greenland named Pernilla, but you don't hear that name in the US very much. It's a very nice name, Pernilla. TU has 2 CDs released, and this is off of the second one. It's entitled Kalipachit Inuganut, which means colors, something about colors. I'm not sure about the second word there. Kalipachit, colors. So the song Naluat is not translated on the notes to the CD, but using all my books and things, I've done a translation for it, which is rather iffy, but I'll give you what I got. So this song says, I don't know you until I see you, but when our eyes meet, I know you. You stop and smile behind me. They can't see what I am wondering. I discover you not until I catch up with you, but our footprints, when they meet, I recognize you. Well, I would recommend checking out either of the CDs done by TU, and they can be found at atlanticmusic.gl. So, coming up in episode 46 of the Dubcast, I'm going to do a subject that really doesn't have anything to do with kayaking, but it has to do with me. So, stay tuned for that on the Dubcast with Dubside.